Tonight, people in Ferguson, Missouri and other parts of the country bracing for the grand jury's decision in the Michael Brown case. The grand jury will soon decide whether the police officer who shot and killed the unarmed teenager will face criminal charges in the case. Authorities on standby as riots could ring out again. And here in our own backyard, we'll have a look at how local officials and the police are trying to strengthen their relationship within the community. And he's done it again. Mayor de Blasio apologizing after showing up late to a service for victims of Flight 587. Is enough when it comes to the mayor's chronic tardiness, or is this, as I'm sure one person on the panel, is the media making a big to-do about nothing? We'll get into that. Plus, we'll dive into the debate over death with dignity. Today, the New Jersey Assembly passing a bill that would make physician-assisted suicide a legal practice. Will the move serve as a test for Governor Christie as he preps for a possible run for the White House in 2016? Good evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thanks so much for joining us. And tonight we will begin in Missouri, Ferguson specifically, where local officials are prepping for the worst, as a grand jury is expected to soon announce its decision in the death case involving 18-year-old Michael Brown. This the scene that Ferguson, Missouri fears might happen again.
That ugliness was not representative of Missouri, and it cannot be repeated.
This plea by Governor Jay Nixon a few days ago, it comes on the heels of a highly anticipated grand jury decision, whether or not to indict police officer Darren Wilson, who shot and killed unarmed teenager Michael Brown.
This will be a defining moment in the history of the state of Missouri.
A Brown family attorney supported the governor's call for calm from protesters, but he also fired back, asking that local law enforcement who had used armored vehicles and tear gas during riots be warned as well.
We would like to thank you in advance for not having a repeat of the horrific encounters that took place in August.
Today, renowned forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Bodden, he testified before the grand jury. He has previously said that based on his limited examination, none of at least 6 gunshots that struck Brown were fired at close range. That contradicts police claims that Brown violently fought with Wilson inside the vehicle and went for the officer's gun. This week, Brown's parents testified on police brutality in the United States during a United Nations meeting in Geneva, Switzerland. Back in Ferguson, businesses boarding up their windows and increased local gun sales, they're a sign that fear is still running high.
It's been emptied and filled and emptied twice this weekend.
Today, much closer to home, the Urban League of Westchester Coalition for Police Reform, and other local groups, they met to discuss ways to try and strengthen community police relations. Our own Dominic Carter, he was at the event, and it featured some pretty high-profile speakers, right, Tom?
Indeed the case, Richard. Well, this is a step in the correct direction. Law enforcement officials and community residents trying to do the right thing.
Then how could we ever expect them to respect us when we don't respect ourselves? So that's just the real. Now, if you look in this room,
The event was titled Building Trust, One Community at a Time, hosted by the Urban League and Pace University. This in light of recent events across the country and in this region, where tensions have increased between law enforcement and the communities they serve.
I was invited here today because of my stance on objectivity in police departments. I think for a community to have trust, and I think for the officers to have trust, both sides have to agree and work towards being objective with each other.
You may recall the case of Sean Bell, the Queens man who was fatally shot by police 8 years ago on his wedding day. 50 shots were fired. His fiancée, Nicole Poultry Bell, attended this conference. So it's been 8 years since the Sean Bell incident, and you're still out here pushing involved. Why?
Every day, every waking day, when I think about my daughters and their life and the importance of standing up, I have to practice what I preach. At home, when I'm with my daughters, I tell them to stand up for what's wrong, stand up for what's right. So it's so important for me to be here today, to be here with all of the families, all the other families.
Also in attendance, Yusef Salam, one of the young men that initially went to jail in the Central Park jogger case. The city of New York recently settled the case with the so-called Central Park Five for $41 million.
You know, I find that it's necessary, even though we've won or we've had some semblance of justice, to lend my voice to all of the struggles that go on around the country, and especially when they hit home and they're close to home, to be a part of that struggle. You know, as like I said, I look on the side of police cars, and we're talking about rebuilding trust in the police officers and trust in the communities. And on the side of police cars in New York City, we have courtesy, professionalism, and respect. But unfortunately, we just received the first letters of those words. We usually need CPR after dealing with the officers. We need to change that dynamic.
Now, is it accurate that you called in the FBI on your own police department to investigate allegations?
I did. There was a large-scale riot, if you will, in the city. Racial undertones were interjected, and I knew that the community would not be satisfied with an internal investigation. So I asked the FBI to take a look at it, and they did. There was no finding of fault, and I think things like that are when you start to instill community. Not so much belief, but again, objectivity that you will do the right things in the right situation.
All involved also said the relationship is definitely a work in progress. Richard, you have to give each side in the region credit for trying to improve the relationship.
Thank you, Dom. And I want to bring in our panel here. Richard Brodsky, former Democratic New York State Assemblyman, now a senior fellow at Demos, also professor at NYU, and Bill O'Reilly, Republican strategist, who served as Rob Astorino's spokesman in his two successful runs for Westchester County exec. As I think everybody waits a little on edge to see what goes on in Ferguson, there are things that we hope they don't do again, but then there's the unknown. We hope we don't see the basically the militarized presence that are going to be there with the tanks and everything rolling down the main street of Missouri and Ferguson. But on the flip side, calls for calm and everything else, it's an open question if people are going to heed it.
It's a long-term problem that's not going to be solved no matter what happens to Ferguson, good or bad. As Ronald Reagan said, trust, but verify. And the way out of this are the cameras, the shield cameras. Mm-hmm. Once everybody knows that there will be objective, and it's a good word the chief uses, evidence of what actually happened, then you won't have to trust the other side to do the right thing. And that will itself build trust. So there's a technological answer to this. And if the police forces and governments around the country have any sense about them, that's the way to head this thing.
You know, Bill, and I want to be careful that this is not a direct analogy, but in a lot of ways it feels like what the church struggled with 10, 15 years ago with all the abuse allegations were coming to the light here, and that all the good priests, the vast, vast majority of the priests, were getting colored with the scandal because leadership wasn't making clear to distinguish the bad from the good. Law enforcement now, the vast majority, if you think about it, they get up every day and they know potentially their life is on the line. Right. They're being lumped in with what happened in Staten Island, what happened, obviously in Ferguson, Missouri, and we don't even know what happened necessarily in Ferguson, Missouri, and other obviously hot spots. We can name all the cases if we want. I think sometimes they're their own worst enemy. When that blue wall comes up, it becomes us and them every time. I understand that why they're doing their job, and I understand, Pat Lynch and the PBA, that's exactly what they're there for. But sometimes when this happens, we find ourselves in this situation, and it's he said, he said.
I mean, it's a very tough job. I mean, there's no question about it. And if something happens in Jersey City, it affects the NYPD or affects the Oakland PD. I mean, police officers across the country can get tarred with this type of stuff. I mean, this is a tough job. There are very high stakes on the street every day, especially in the inner city communities where there's guns on the street. Police are afraid. Police are trying to do their job well. Mistakes do happen. They certainly occur. You just hope in Ferguson that Ferguson's done what New York has done very well over the last 20 years, is to work within church groups and community leaders and to get some kind of coalition together.
Even Al Sharpton.
We can discuss that. Yeah, we can discuss that. But there's been in New York there are a lot of safety switches in place where there's almost where you see in New York you get negotiated demonstrations where everybody knows what each side is going to do first and second, and it works out and you get your say and the other side.
It is true, Tom. If you compare what happened with Staten Island and the aftermath here versus what happened in Missouri. New York's learned the hard way through a lot of obviously really painful incidents that have happened right now. He's right, just like Bill said, it was negotiated protest. You're not going to walk across the bridge, you're not going to shut it down, we're going to do it this time at this place, the cops are going to give you your space. You've seen when it doesn't always go down that way, right?
I was thinking back, and this is a terrible time for New York City, and I hate to bring up this point, but I remember, because Bensonhurst is a very good community in New York City, but I remember the first time Sharpton went there, the first couple of times, ultimately he was stabbed in the chest. But I remember when I was marching as a journalist covering the protesters, and people were holding up watermelon and throwing watermelons and so on. And I would interview them and they would say, well, we're not talking to you, we're talking about them. And I'm like, but, and so it was an ugly time. And now the NYPD, I was also at the march in Staten Island. It was a beautiful thing to see professionalism at play, where, again, as Bill points out, you negotiating, as you just said, what you're going to do. And so the rally that was held on Staten Island, many of those police officers told me they were watching the show the night before when we were here, to see how things were done in a peaceful manner, to see how community police officers who wear the blue jackets are marching with the protesters. So if something goes down, they can stop their fellow law enforcement officers and say, wait, we got this. And so, it's just, to see the NYPD at play, it's a good thing. But what I fear, Richard, in this case, is that we're going to get a decision in Missouri, and right around the corner, we're going to a grand jury decision. We're going to get one. Remember, that case is out as well in Staten Island. And I believe DA Dan Donovan's going to come back. And I hope they don't come back at the same time, approximately.
And Richard, you have two so polarized accounts of what happened from the police perspective and then from some of the eyewitness accounts. And some of the eyewitness accounts they found some flaws with, but the police basically said, the guy came after him, and he went, and the gun only went off in the police car, and then that forensic expert says, wait a minute, the guy had his hands up and he was in the middle of the street, and the shots came from a larger distance.
The cops have never said that there were no shots fired at long range. They say there were shots fired in the car, but they have never taken the position that there were no shots fired at 12 or 15 feet. They're silent about that.
No, but where the difference is, they said that there were shots fired at very close range. In fact, he went for his gun, and there was a physical struggle, and they showed all the marks on both his neck here and his head as a result of that struggle. That distinction is the difference here.
What the legal case is going to turn, not on the, I think, fairly well-established fact that there was a struggle in the car, but what happened 30 seconds later. Was there an intervening calm? Was he shot from 12 or 15 feet? Were there powder burns? You have the testimony of of that, I think. And the explanation people make will have a lot to do with how people react to it. What I think you're likely to get is some sort of manslaughter indictment, not a murder indictment. And I think that's going to anger both sides, which is a sign of something.
If it's manslaughter, the community would be very happy. I think many community residents are bracing for the fact that this officer is going to completely walk. And if that's the case, I don't know what may happen. We hope they'll be calm, but I don't know. And then you turn around and there's no indictment in Staten Island, it won't be pretty in terms of upset people.
All right, when we come back, we will switch gears here, much closer to home. Speaking of police, can New Yorkers safely say that Mayor de Blasio hasn't lived up to his promise when it comes to the NYPD and its policing practices? A lot of progressives say 10 months into the job, they've expected more. And the mayor, well, he's known for chronic tardiness, but did he actually cross a line here when he showed up not just a little late, but very late to a memorial for victims of Flight 587? We'll talk about both of those and more after this.